Hi, my name is Gary Greenbaum, and I'm the CEO of Syntonic. And I'd like to spend maybe 10 minutes or so just providing some market observations and some framing, some information to help with our panel's discussion today. Again, I want to thank everyone. It should be a rather interesting discussion with our distinguished panelists. So I want to talk about the data plan. It's a pretty abstract concept if you think about it. You almost have to be an information theorist to understand what is a data plan. And certainly, it doesn't really map into the value that you derive from today's smartphones, where it's all about the content and the applications. And I would claim that the data plan itself, in some respects, is really holding back the full monetization potential of the mobile internet. Fortunately, there's some changes that are starting to happen, and it really is this transformation of kind of what the right access currency should be moving forward. Should it be bits and bytes and megabytes, or is it really around content? So, and we're starting to see those trends in real time, and obviously we'll talk about that. It was interesting, when I started this company 4 years ago, when I was chatting with various tier 1 carriers around the globe and trying to propose these new access models. Everyone realized that was the future. Everyone realized this was the right way to go. But things were great. Markets weren't saturated. ARPUs were growing. There was still a lot of upside opportunity. But then something happened about a year and a half ago, where things have started to change a little bit, dependent upon the various geographies. But essentially, markets became saturated. And carriers were left with selling sort of a commodity called data, and the only way of differentiating that is based on price. And so carriers then started to get very interested, almost to the point of panic, of seeking out new sort of revenue models to accommodate sort of the decline in ARPU that was happening. Slightly different problem in emerging economies, where there isn't market saturation just yet, but there the issue is how do you grow ARPUs, especially with people who can't afford to be connected. How do you monetize the unconnected, essentially? And so, to talk about, I think, the here and now, let's spend a minute or two just talking about how we got here. In the beginning, there was voice. And the natural access currency for voice is minutes, sort of makes sense. The next wave of innovation was the text message. There, the quantum that makes sense is paying per text message. And then we went to data. And then the question at that point is, what's the right sort of access currency for data? It's certainly not time, because accessing things on the mobile internet is kind of a bursty sort of thing. So the decision was, let's try data. And for a long time, that was great. Things were great for mobile carriers. But then something very disruptive happened. And it was called the smartphone, but more specifically, it was the App Store itself. And as a result, the phone that was primarily a communication device transformed itself. It now became sort of that essential component to connect you with the rest of the world. And instead of just making calls and texts, this was your access to news, sports, weather, friends, family. And what happened subtly, actually maybe rather quickly, was the real value layer transformed from commodity access to services. And as a result, there's this question about how do carriers survive moving forward? Do they maintain sort of the peddlers of commodity data and trying to stay ahead of this race to the bottom? Or do we try to maybe transition to become real service providers and and participate in this new value layer around content and applications? So it's an interesting time right now, and obviously we'll talk a lot about this. From a value perspective, value proposition perspective, making this transition benefits the entire ecosystem. Certainly from a carrier, to make this transition from network provider, service provider, again, new revenue opportunities, differentiated revenue opportunities. From a consumer perspective, well, you now know what you're buying. You're buying access to content and applications as opposed to data. And frankly, it also opens up new models where other people will be sponsoring your access to that content. And again, very friendly sort of new models for consumers. And then the third component of the value ecosystem here is the app developers, the content providers, and the sponsors. And what's interesting is right now we have about 2 million applications in the various app stores, spending about $100 billion to promote themselves, to try to attract new users and engage with users. And there's some real traditional ways of doing this, impressions, installs, and so on. However, there's really no tools that are pretty standard and useful and effective to moving consumers through the pipeline to monetization. So if you're an advertiser or an app developer, fairly straightforward how to grow reach, but how do you engage? And then how do you move that into monetization? And one of the really cool things that happens in this transformation from bits and bytes to the sort of connected access around content is that it introduces now new tools that allow brands to engage with consumers in a very cost-effective fashion. And I'll give an example. We have a deployment in Indonesia, and we've been working with Reliance Digital Entertainment, a big gaming company, and we used some of their apps for exploration in the Indonesia market, and we found that using sponsored access, we were able to reduce the CPI costs for growing new audiences by over 40% more effective. And the second thing was, and this is really neat, we were able to provide promotions for end users to use content, these games, for 30 minutes at a cost that was roughly a CPI cost. Now think about this. We have 30 minutes of use for a particular game at the cost of just acquiring a user. And there's a little secret in the gaming world where if you can actually engage with an end user for about 30 to 35 minutes, he's hooked, or he's now invested in that game. Much easier to monetize that end user. The other really interesting model around the new wave of advertising, and I think you're going to see it this year, we're going to generate a lot of this ourselves, is sort of the over-the-top video services across carriers. That will be ad-sponsored as well as subscription-based. So some really new models, and you're starting to see things that are very carrier-centric. In the United States with DirecTV and Verizon stuff and T-Mobile stuff. But there is some interesting opportunities in 2017 where you're going to see some major brands being able to offer direct-to-consumer subscription-type content around audio and video. That's I think rather exciting. So what I'd like to conclude with is, basically the future is now. There's a lot of content providers and a lot of carriers that are trialing and piloting, exploring and experimenting, generating learnings and refining business models. And even some major carriers now that are aligning with and are acquiring major content companies. And obviously as a means of, if you're an operator in a developed country, this is all about avoiding commoditization of your business. Emerging markets really about monetizing the unconnected. So I think just to leave a final statement, it's really those carriers that kind of invest now in this transition from network providers to service providers, I think will really be able to participate in the value creation in this next wave of mobile innovation. Thank you.